Before we begin the debate, I would just like to point out that back in the 60s, what were teens portrayed as? Radical hippies. Characters such as Scooby-Doo, popular stories such as Scooby-Doo showing this images with the character Shaggy, which is a very typical radical hippie teenager. We define the term radical as being far-fetched and affecting the fundamental nature of something. In other words, something or someone that disrupts the community in a dangerous way. This definition
and showing others that being a certain colour or race doesn't make you better than anyone else, and that everyone can be equal if they just accept who they are for who they are. My next speaker, Reese, will then be talking to you about Saffron, making sure that you see the truth about who these teenagers are. From the website National Museums Australia, we have found that there are 3 points that the Freedom Riders were pushing for. One of the major points was to draw attention to the poor state of their Aboriginal health, education and housing. Let me ask every one of you here one simple question. If they were so radical, why would they try changing the views of all these Australians and creating their own group called the Student Action of Aborigines, SAPA for instance? For example, a man named Charles Perkins was one of the two Australian Aboriginal people that at the University of Sydney to take part in organising a trip around New South Wales on the 12th of February 1965. SAFA was responsible for going to great towns and surveying people on the terms of health, housing and population. It was stated by Rev. Tim Knowles, how impressed he was that the university students would use their own holiday time to emphasise and promote the plight of Indigenous community members. In conclusion, what we are debating about is that SAFA is...
Indigenous Australians tend to die earlier than non-Indigenous Australians, and their death rates are almost twice those of non-Indigenous Australians. Indigenous boys born between 2010 and 2012 can expect to live to 69.1 years, and Indigenous girls to 73.7 years. Compared with the non-Indigenous Australians, 79.7 years for non-Indigenous boys and 83.1 for non-Indigenous girls. Now tell me what has changed. Not much, I would say, sadly. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, my team has clearly outlined that the Freedom Riders were radical teenagers trying to distract themselves from work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon. We, as the negative side of this debate, want you to know the complete facts behind these students who are actually volunteers, children, and students. Max spoke to you about SAFA and the wonderful work and achievements they have accomplished. So, for the affirmative team, I see you have researched the definition of radical, and you have compared the meaning of radical against these students. Just for the audience, the actual meaning of the definition of radical in this situation is a person who advocates thorough and complete political or social reform, a member of a political party pursuing such aims.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. In conclusion, my team has clearly shown that the Freedom Riders were radical and out of control. Our first speaker told you that the definition of radical is that you are an extreme political activist. Clearly, as Dylan mentioned, the Freedom Riders were not even a political party. Our second speaker, Abby, has clearly outlined that although the interests of these young radical teenagers were good, they have clearly failed. Abby has had some fantastic statistics showcasing this. The first native speaker told you that the Freedom Riders were not radicals. This is wrong because the Freedom Riders were not mostly university and college students, or in other words, pre-meditate adults. In conclusion, our affirmative has clearly outlined a compelling argument on the freedom riders were in fact radical teenagers getting out of work.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for this part of the debate is that we believe that the freedom riders were not all radical teenagers, but they were actually mature adults. They weren't just people riding random buses going other parts of the world. They went into the towns. I don't think they were a bunch of radical hippies. I don't think they were just a bunch of people that went, you know, we're just going to get off school, we're going to go here and there and there and there and there and there. We're just going to They're actually people that need to do stuff, and they actually went out to do stuff.
They get very excited. Can we just give the second debate team a big round of if you weren't here for the first debate, you can now see them. This is Miss Matheson and Miss Fry. They are the other major components, the history and English components, and I teach media. So without all, I guess, the input from the students and then us putting their trust in them, this wouldn't happen. So this has been 9 weeks now in the making, and it's a pretty big deal for all the students. They've done an awesome job. We just want to bring your attention to the projects that they've got up around the room from other assignments that they've had, and the fact that obviously we've got people on Twitter and things like that. So there's a few ways that you can